Well, thank you very much for your kind invitation. Frankly spoken, it's the very first time that I'm here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, by indeed two convincible reasons to participate in this important conference. And tomorrow morning I would like to visit the Constitution in Boston, a very famous US as Frigate, because I have a wonderful ship model of this American frigate in my office, and I would like to see it in original. Well, to talk about the European responsibility due to the Euro crisis appears to me, within 30 minutes, appears a little bit to me like the tourist program for Japanese in Europe, Europe in 2 days. I will do so. I have no manuscript, and perhaps I will miss the one or other aspect you might be interested in, but I think afterwards, when Mrs. Nia is moderating our discussion, and when perhaps there are some questions in this room, I would try to answer those questions which hasn't been part of my little speech. I will try to make it as briefly as it is scheduled in 30 minutes. But incidentally, no politician will be in time. I know a politician who promised to be in time with 30 minutes, scheduled 30 minutes, and then he spoke 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and then he had a glimpse to the faces of his audience and noticed, well, some of them are getting nervous, and then he tried to apologize with a hint that he's forgotten his watch at home. And then somebody shouted out of the audience, but behind you at the wall there's hanging a calendar. So whenever somebody is shouting calendar, I would interrupt immediately my speech, and we will start with the discussion with Mrs. Nia. Well, Europe is not in a good shape. I will start with that remark. Undoubtedly, we are not in a good shape. We're suffering by continuing financial and economic turmoils. And I must add, as far as my observations, the United States aren't in a very good shape as well. I don't want to play down the problems we are facing in Europe, but nevertheless, I think there are some common interests to improve the transatlantic relationships and to discuss how we can manage together these challenges. Coming back to Europe, well, it started obviously with a typical banking crisis in 2007. You're very familiar with the development, with the acceleration in 2008 due to the situation of Lehman. At that time, I was more concerned about the possible default of AIG and perhaps 2 weeks later of Morgan Stanley. But nevertheless, that was the first stage of these turmoils we are facing since nearly 4 years. Then we entered an economic crisis. In Germany, we faced a remarkably turned down to more than minus 5%. That never has been happened before in post-war times in Germany since '49. There was the second stage, and the third stage was related to this economic downturn, a fiscal problem, a fiscal challenge, because the public households, the public budgets, credit financing, stimulus packages, and the stabilization of the banking sector increased their borrowing requirements remarkably. And now we are facing a fourth stage, the refinancing problems of sovereigns in the European Monetary Union. I would like to make it clear we are not talking, in my eyes, we are not talking about a euro crisis. Definitely not. And for me, it's very important to make that clear from my point of view at the very beginning of my speech, because we need a reasonable diagnosis in order to elaborate a related and reasonable crisis management strategy. We are not facing a euro crisis. I don't want to play down the problems, but I would like to explain it. The purchase power of the euro is quite all right. You can buy in Europe exactly the same goods and the same services at nearly the same price as 5 years ago. And the inflation development since the introduction of the euro has never been a problem. It was even better than the inflation development of the old times of the D-mark in its last 10 years. The exchange rate of the euro is quite reasonable, quite all right. Swinging between now 1.27 to 1.30 something, no problem at all. I can remember times when the euro was down to 0.85, and the export industry stood in front of my desk as a finance minister and was complaining, oh, the euro is too strong when the euro was up to 150. And all our export activities are too much affected by this strong euro exchange rate. So once again, to make it brief, we are not facing a euro crisis. The crisis can turn into a euro crisis, but up to now, the real diagnosis is we have a refinancing crisis of member states of the European Union, and that's something different. And we have a refinancing crisis of these countries by different reasons, which is very important too. In the case of Greece, it's definitely a debt crisis, definitely. But have a look on Ireland, it's not a debt crisis. In Ireland, it's a banking crisis because the banking system, the Irish banking system, nearly collapsed. And to stabilize this Irish banking system, the Irish government take over guarantees in 2007, 2008, and that means a lot of infection channels in the Irish budget. They are suffering by that. No wonder. Because the additional balance sheet of the Irish banks has been 6 times or even 7 times as large as the yearly GDP of Ireland. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. The balance sheet of the 5 or 6 most important Irish banks have been 6 or 7 times as large as the yearly GDP of Ireland. Another case is, for example, Iceland. Or to a certain extent, my very beloved neighbor, Switzerland. So in the case of Spain, it's not a banking crisis. The debt quotas of Spain are even better than the debt quotas of Germany. They fulfilled for a long time the Maastricht criteria of 60% debts in comparison to their GDP. In the case of Spain, it's the financing of a real estate bubble, but not a debt crisis. In the case of Portugal, it's more or less a crisis of losing competitiveness. But in the case of Greece, it is indeed a debt crisis. And overall, and in average, indeed, we have an exceeding debt or net borrowing requirement of the member states of the European Union. But once again, I think it is not a euro crisis. And I would make a bet that in 10 years, we will still have the euro as the second important currency reserve in the world after the US dollar, and a little bit ahead of the Chinese currency, the yen or renminbi, with a decreasing significance of the yen and not any significance any longer of the British pound. But I won't make a bet. Oh, I'm born in Hamburg. And the citizens of Hamburg are more British than even the British. So there's no complaints about the British. I love them, in particular their taste of humor and their self-irony. This is not a specific quality of Germans, self-irony. But coming back, I would make a bet regarding the future of the euro, but I won't make a bet who is a participant of the European Monetary Union. I don't know. So coming back to Greece, I think in the meantime, my impression is that we are, after 2 years, back to the starting point. It started with the Greek crisis. We had to tackle this Greece crisis beginning in 2010, and then we undertook strong achievements to stabilize the situation. But all the decisions being passed by the European Council, the heads of state and government in the European Union, were, in my impression, in my judgment, always too late, too little, and uncertain. In particular, uncertain. We haven't been able to tell the markets, the capital, the financial markets, what I would like to express as a final story, and to give or to carry out a comprehensive package to stabilize the European Monetary Union. We missed. So I can understand to a far extent the critics in America, and from officials as well as from experts, due to a mishandling of these crisis situations since more than 1.5 years. The problem is that we concentrated this crisis management only on 2 things, or on 2 points. First, we are going to refinance still, exceedingly, the net borrowing requirements of Greece. The second point, we are going to prescript these Greece government and the people a very sharp consolidation program. And this sharp consolidation program is getting more and more familiar with a strong austerity program. And this austerity program means that the growth rates are going down, that the unemployment rate is going up, that the tax revenues decrease, and that there's no chance, and in particular for the people of Greece, no hope, no perspective that it might go better within the next years. And that's the reason that this financial or economic problem can turn to a very clear political and social problem, not only in Greece, but affecting other countries too. Because I think even for Germany, it is unacceptable to have a destabilized, neighborhooded country in our foregarden. But you can see it in the streets. General strikes, the people are upset, outrages. So I think we must be quite aware that there's something happened not only in economic terms, but in political terms too. And very much concerned I see that at the same time the resentments and the ressentiments on both sides increase. In Greece as well as in the so-called contributing countries with a high creditworthiness, paying for Mediterranean countries. And this concerns me indeed very much because I can see that the people in Greece are suffering or complaining sort of a German dictatorship or a German leadership. It's one issue we are going to discuss. Or more than that, there are many references in the meantime in the Greece medias to old Nazi times. And on the other side, in Germany, for example, many people, many voters, many citizens in my country say, why should we pay for all these failures and these deficits to be responsible, or where the Greeks are responsible for? Because they haven't reconstructed their administrational system, their governance. They haven't gained more competitiveness of their economy in the good times when they could. And there were good times, very good times for Greece and some other countries. Very good times due to the fact that, for example, Greece had to issue a governmental bond in the 90s before they had access to the currency union by around about an interest rate of 14 or 15%, 10 years maturity, 10 or 15%. And when they had access to the monetary union, they had to pay for the same government bond, 10 years maturity, 3%. By an inflation rate of 2.5 or nearly 3%, which means a zero real interest rate. Wonderful times. But they haven't used that time. So that is a big feeling, or this is a remarkable feeling in my country, because many people point out, well, why should we pay for the mishandling in Greece? And so the prejudices on both sides emerge, and I mean this is indeed very, very critical. Well, we can be blamed for this mishandling of the crisis management, but the cat is out of the bag. So we can have a long discussion what has been driven wrong, that we missed to launch at the same time a recovery program. Some people even mentioned a Marshall Plan for Greece, and I was very much in favor with some fellow of my party to say, well, it's absolutely necessary to support the Greece to regain economic strength, to decrease, in particular, the unemployment rate of young people, to be helpful to improve their infrastructure for tourism, to be helpful to establish a broader segment of small and medium-sized companies, and so on and so on. And up to now, the European Council didn't launch or didn't carry out a program which might be familiar to what I mentioned as a recovery program. But as I said, the cat is out of the bag, and in the meantime, really nobody really knows what's going on now, because I said, well, we are back to the starting point after 2 years. It started with Greece, and then we have undertaken strong achievements, for example, a six-pack, a European semester, an EFSF as one firewall, an ESM, a European Stability Mechanism, as a permanent firewall, a Fiscal Compact, a Euro Plus Pact, and so on and so on. And I could drop many of these decisions which has been passed by the European Commission and by the European Council. But after 2 years, we're back to the starting point. And the problem is that I see no precondition, no prerequisite that Greece can re-enter the capital markets within the next 6 or 7 years again. Because from her budget side, they are far away from any primary surplus. They are far away to finance their net borrowing requirement alone or by conditions which are to a certain extent reasonable or advantageous. On the other side, I think my parliament and the parliament of the French, of France, of the Netherlands, of Austria, of Luxembourg and Finland, or these countries who are more and more landing states, they are asked to pass a next umbrella, bilateral umbrella for Greece within the next 2 weeks in an amount of 130 billion euro. And the representatives of my parliament and of the other national parliaments are asking, well, are we burning money? And what is going to happen if the Greeks come along, for example, winter next time and ask for a third time, yes, I need another 100 billion euros? And what is the reaction of our citizens? So in the meantime, I feel very unsafe if it is necessary to be prepared for an orderly insolvency procedure of Greece. And I would like to add within the European Monetary Union, which means such a preparation that we have to establish a recapitalization facilities for involved banks, obviously not only for private creditors, but perhaps for public creditors too, because the ECB might be involved as well. That we have to enhance our achievements to be helpful, that Greece can come in economic terms up again, which means to offer them a recovery program, financed, for example, by the structural funds or by the cohesion fund of the European Union, and there are tons of money. But to attract this money, in order to invest in Greece, we have to be helpful, and we have to improve the administrational preconditions and the governance of Greece to attract and to spend and to invest this money. Well, some people would quote, not only in Germany, but in some other neighborhood countries, well, leave them alone. This is not my solution. And at that time, I would like to point out expressively that in particular Germany has not only a deep national interest in stabilizing the European Union and monetary union, I think it is part of our European responsibility as well. For Germany, it is very important to support this stabilization of Europe, because Europe is on one side the answer on 1945. I will come back to that point, and the answer on the challenges of the 21st century. The integration of Europe, the cooperation of Europe, is the answer on 1945. And the young generation in my country and in all the other befriended neighborhood and other countries, they are living under exceptional circumstances due to the development of the last 6 decades by welfare and freedom, despite the Balkan Wars during the 90s. And this is not self-evident that it remains so. You have to engage. You have to engage, in particular as young people, that this remarkable development of Europe after hundreds and hundreds of centuries of permanent wars in Europe, that this situation remains. I myself, I'm born in 1947. And after my grandfather, and my father, I'm the first generation since 100 years which haven't been sent to a war in Europe or even a world war. That's the quality. And take it serious. The other point is, well, when you don't want to look back, it's the answer on the 21st century too. Why? Because the world is tremendously changing. Against this background of a totally new pattern of economic and political power and influence, I think we need a common European answer. I will tell a little story. When I came in office in 2005, I attended several times the so-called G7 meetings, a very exclusive club. Sometimes, yes, we were so grateful that Russia would attend these meetings too, then it was a G8 meeting. But what I wanted to express is that was a very exclusive European Atlantic club. The UK, the Brits, France, Italy, Germany, Canada, United States, and obviously always the Japanese. And it worked. The very first time that this economic summit was established is going back to 1974, when the French President Giscard d'Estaing and the German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt started with these summits. And everybody was convinced that this exclusive Atlantic European club is conducting the world. In economic terms and political terms, technological spoken, and obviously in military terms too. And then the financial turmoils came up. With an escalation in 2008, and suddenly it was not any longer the G7 club who was invited, it was suddenly the G20 club. And around the table they were sitting not only China, everybody is hypnotized by the snake or the dragon of China, but that is, well, a crucial point, and they are a driving force in these changes I tried to describe now. It was as well Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, incidentally 200 million people, South Korea, South Africa, and, for example, Turkey. Some experts point out on other scores that Turkey will be, within the next 8 or 7 years, one of the 10th largest economies all over the world. And they said once, at that time, the very first financial summit happened in November 2008 in Washington, headed by President George W. Bush. Obama was president elected at that time, but the inauguration was, as you obviously remember, in January 2009. And all these countries complained us. You are responsible for these damn financial turmoils. It was you, the Americans and the Europeans, the Americans with their subprime crisis spreading over the Atlantic with all these stupid German and European bankers who bought all these structural bonds or structural products with a high risk ignorance, and they set it forth. And thus, this will never happen again. So whenever you think your exclusive club of 4 European countries, 2 North American countries, and Japan, think you will conduct the world again, and it is you who might be the most influential factor in re-establishing the financial architecture of the world, you are wrong. You are definitely wrong. You will never be sitting alone around the desk. So that's something new. And I think even the Europeans nor the Americans are trained up to now, not only to notice, but to accept these dramatically changing patterns worldwide. I have to move very cautious now because I don't want to blame anybody. And my ambassador, when he gave me a briefing on Monday morning, said, well, don't be too outspoken. But for all Americans in this convention hall, it's God's own country. You always win all gold medals. But what is happening if you are not winning all gold medals any longer? You see, the European countries are trained in the rise and fall of great powers. Obviously, the US will always play a dominant role in every term. You will remain to be a superpower. But what is going to happen if you lose the faith that you are a supremacy? Because the world is getting multipolar, more multipolar than ever again, with all these other countries I've mentioned. Are you obsessed by that question? And when you're going to criticize the German or the European crisis management due to our debt crisis, May I politely and carefully add that you are facing a debt crisis too? And that your debt quota is even worse than the average of the European Monetary Union? Your public debt is around 95% of your GDP. And your private debts are exactly 100% of your GDP in the United States. Following the old idiom of buy now, pay later. And have a look to the deficits of your current account. And do these deficits of your current account indicate a little loss of your competitiveness? It's a question, not more. And then I read your newspapers. And then I see that some people announce a further tax relief of $500 or even $1,200 billion. And I myself raised the question, how are you going to refinance such a tax reduction when you already have a debt quota of 95%? So I don't want to go further down the road regarding this issue because it's very thin ice. I can read that in your faces. But I would like to point out we have some common problems, and I think we are well advised perhaps to discuss about it. Coming back with some last sentences or remarks to Europe. The problem is that we have in the meantime only the choice between bad solutions, which can be criticized from a legal point of view, an economic point of view, and political point of view. And for the time being, I think the European Central Bank, the ECB, has to be sort of a bridge builder due to short-term crisis management. There's one difference you should know between the mandates of the Fed and the ECB. The European Central Bank has only one mandate to serve for price stability. Instead of the Fed and the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan, they have two mandates, not only to serve for price stability, but to support employment and economic growth. And that makes a difference. So the legal basis of the ECB does not allow to finance sovereigns. But they do. And we are lucky about it. No official in Germany or other country would make that clear because it is definitely not legally allowed. But in my eyes, it's for sure that, for example, President Sarkozy and Chancellor Merkel is enlightening every evening a little candle in their window that the ECB will continue to buy sovereign bonds on the secondary market. Makes a slight difference. But I think they have to continue to do so until we have established better firewalls. And you know, these firewalls of EFSF and ESM, and I think the American criticizers are right that we have to increase this firewall, in my eyes, by an additional solution of the ESFS and the ESM, and not a substitutional solution, which means to take the 250 billion of the EFSF and the 500 of the ESM, so that there is a firepower of 750 billion euro. Might be a very important step, which should be established with the ESM beginning in July of this year. A third step could be the ratification of the so-called Fiscal Compact. Perhaps you have heard of it. It is not an amendment of the European treaties, but it is an agreement on international law, because the United Kingdom and the Czech Republic did not enter this agreement or did not adopt this agreement. So we don't have the chance to agree on an amendment of the European treaties, which have been even better in my eyes. But nevertheless, now we are compelled to ratify it. But this Fiscal Compact will not be ratified before autumn this year. In particular, because we are facing presidential elections in France at the end of April, a second round in May, and I think all the national parliaments will not be capable to ratify before the summertime, but nevertheless, when it should be happening in September, I would be very content. And at that time, it could be possible to make something which has been rejected up to now by my government, The keyword are Eurobonds. Because my government can say, well, I was never in favor of these Eurobonds because, well, I'm frightened by the possibility that moral hazard will go on because there's no mechanism, there are no means and measures to discipline the budget policy of some Mediterranean countries. But due to some agreements we already made, in particular the Fiscal Compact and the European semester and so on, now we have the preconditions that we can say, as Germany, with our very high creditworthiness, okay, this is the time where we agree on such an instrument. And that could be a more comprehensive, perhaps not a final, but a comprehensive package to impress the financial markets. It's not for sure that it works, but I think we should undertake strong achievements to go further down the road in this perspective over the short-term crisis management. Afterwards, we need a midterm crisis management. And bluntly spoken, I think we are facing sort of a junction. We can go back to a very loose association of European countries with a more or less free trade zone. That would be a backlash. Or we go further down the road in integrating Europe. And I think the answer is we have to learn the lessons. And after each challenge we had to tackle during the last 50 years, the reply was always to integrate Europe. This isn't as easy as I tried to point it out here or to underscore, because in that case, you have to transfer more sovereign rights to European institutions. So the member states will lose sovereignty. And this is set very much in doubt by many political forces in our countries. For example, in that case, in particular regarding the budget right of my parliament, our constitutional court points out that in that case you have to make an amendment of the German constitution called Grundgesetz. And this would mean, in the eyes of the president of this constitutional court, a very respected chairman, that we have to do something in Germany which never happened again in the history of post-war. A referendum. We have to ask the people. We have to ask, or would have to ask the people, and this is indeed something it is exciting, because there were two moments in the German history where, in my eyes, it was absolutely necessary to ask the German people. The German reunification, no one has been asked. And the introduction of the euro. So this is something new, so I try to explain it to you in order to make it quite clear that the consequences are very, very, very significant whenever we are going to integrate Europe. I'm very much in favor of this European integration, not only by the reasons I already underscored or emphasized due to 1945 as one deep reason, and the challenges challenges of the 21st century. And I would be very glad if I can convince you to have some trust that we succeeded. A politician must be convinced that he can succeed. When he is standing up in the early morning and he always thinks he will fail, then he shouldn't be a politician. Thank you very much for your long attention. I've read a lot of articles on you.